I'm Lana, 26, and on my wedding night my parents didn't give me blessings. They gave me humiliation. My father struck me across the face, my mother laughed, and my sister smirked as the room watched. But then my groom's father took the microphone and turned everything upside down. Suddenly, I wasn't the family's shame. I was the woman about to hold an empire. And my parents? They learned too late that breaking me would cost them everything. The band was already playing when I entered the hall, my dress catching the glow of the spotlights as every guest turned to look. Applause echoed against the high ceiling, but I didn't feel the warmth of celebration. My father's glare cut through the room like a blade, and before I could take another step, he stormed across the polished floor. His hand struck my face with such force that the music seemed to collapse around us. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For a moment, no one moved. Then my mother's laughter broke the silence, sharp and cruel, as though she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. She raised her glass and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's always been a disappointment." My sister leaned against her chair, smirking as if this was some private victory. A cluster of cousins whispered at the back, their eyes darting between me and my parents, feeding off the humiliation. My father waved me off like I was nothing more than a stain on the floor he wanted gone. The heat of 100 stares pressed into my skin, and my mother twisted the knife deeper with her next words, "At least your sister will make us proud." I stood there, motionless, my hands trembling but my eyes dry. I had spent my life surviving their cruelty, but nothing prepared me for this public display, not at my wedding, not in front of strangers and family who now viewed me as weak prey. The microphone squealed across the hall, slicing through the whispers. My groom's father rose from his seat, every step deliberate as he walked toward the stage. Conversations died in his wake. He was a man known for his authority, for commanding boardrooms and securing deals that built empires. Now, all attention belonged to him. He lifted the microphone and scanned the room, his gaze stopping directly on my parents. His voice came out steady, carrying over the crowd with the weight of final judgment. Enough. The single word froze the hall. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His tone alone silenced the laughter that had spilled from my mother's lips. He fixed his stare on my father, then on my mother, and continued. "You dare humiliate the woman who will carry our family name? The woman who, starting tomorrow, will co-own my empire with her husband." A ripple of shock traveled through the guests. Chairs shifted, conversations sparked in hushed tones. My mother lowered her glass slowly, her smirk collapsing into disbelief. My father's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling in front of the very people he always sought to impress. My sister's smirk vanished, replaced by a nervous twitch of her jaw as the weight of his words sank in. The man on stage wasn't finished. His voice sharpened, deliberate and precise. "Every contract, every share, every future deal, she will sign off on. So, if you thought she was weak, think again. She is the backbone of what comes next." The microphone thudded against the podium as he set it down. For a second, silence hung heavy in the air, the entire room suspended between shock and realization. Then the applause came, hesitant at first, then building, until the hall thundered with it. Guests turned their eyes to me, their clapping no longer out of courtesy, but out of recognition. I stood in the center of the room, no longer the humiliated daughter, but the woman they suddenly understood carried power in her name. My parents sat frozen, trapped in their seats, unable to recover the authority they had so carelessly thrown away. Their arrogance shattered in front of everyone they once sought to dominate. The applause still echoed when I stepped down from the stage, though it wasn't my feet that felt unsteady, it was the ground beneath my parents. They didn't move, not even when people leaned toward them with sidelong glances, whispering in disbelief. My mother clutched her glass like a shield, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father's jaw clenched, the red mark on my cheek mirrored by the pallor draining from his own face. For the first time, they were silent, and silence from them was more jarring than any insult they had ever thrown at me. Guests hurried to change sides, as they always do when power shifts. Aunts who had ignored me for years now touched my arm, telling me how radiant I looked. Distant cousins smiled as if they hadn't been whispering about me just moments ago. My sister remained still, her smirk gone, her eyes darting between our parents and me like she was calculating which way to lean. I saw it in her face. Envy already setting in, the fear that the spotlight she had been promised was slipping permanently from her grasp. My groom stood tall at my side, his expression calm, though I knew him well enough to see the storm brewing beneath it. He said nothing, but the set of his shoulders told me he understood what his father had just done. It wasn't a defense made from affection. It was a declaration of alliance. His empire, his power, his future, and mine. My parents had mocked me in front of everyone, and in doing so, they had been forced to bow to something greater than their pride. The music resumed, though softer this time, as if the band sensed the air had shifted. Conversations grew louder, filled with speculation, while I sat at the table reserved for the bride and groom, watching my parents pretend they hadn't just lost the battle they started. My mother leaned in close to my father, whispering fiercely, her knuckles white around her glass. He shook his head, his eyes flicking toward me before he looked away. They weren't beaten, not yet. I knew them too well. Their silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Dinner was served, and the clinking of silverware filled the hall. People forced laughter, tried to drown the tension, but the undercurrent was undeniable. My father's eyes met mine across the room, and in them I saw the familiar glint of challenge. He was plotting, even here, even now. My mother pressed her hand to his arm, the same way she always did when she was reminding him that appearances mattered. Yet I could read her too, the flicker in her gaze, the calculation churning behind her forced smile. They would not let tonight end as their defeat. When the speeches began, my chest tightened, bracing for what might come next. My maid of honor spoke first, my oldest friend, her words kind but trembling. She tried to smooth over the earlier chaos, talking about love and loyalty, but I knew everyone was only half listening. They were waiting to see what my parents would do. My sister followed, her voice sugar-coated, but edged with bitterness. "You've always surprised us," she said, pausing just long enough for people to sense the bite underneath. "And I suppose tonight is no different." The room chuckled politely, but her eyes never left mine, daring me to flinch. I didn't. Then the microphone lingered near my parents' table. My father didn't reach for it. Neither did my mother. They exchanged a glance, and I saw hesitation. The great voices that had filled my childhood with criticism, the two people who had always spoken louder than anyone else, stayed quiet. The microphone passed them by, and whispers filled the room at their silence. That silence said more than any words could have. Afterward, the dancing began. My groom led me across the floor, his hand firm in mine, his eyes steady. He whispered only once, "You're not alone anymore," and that was enough. Yet even as I spun beneath the lights, my eyes tracked the corners of the room. My parents didn't leave early. They stayed, watching, their composure returned, but their pride cracked. My mother smiled too brightly at anyone who approached her. My father laughed louder than necessary, forcing a mask of control. I knew it well, the mask he wore before striking. When the night ended and the last guests trickled out, I stood at the doorway with my husband, thanking people for coming. My parents passed us without a word. No congratulations, no apology. My mother's eyes lingered on me for half a second, unreadable. My father didn't look at me at all. They walked into the night, their silhouettes sharp against the streetlights, and I felt it in my bones. This wasn't over. The next morning, the newspapers carried headlines about the party. Not about the flowers, not about the guests, but about the scene. Photographs of my father mid-strike, my mother laughing, the stunned faces of those around us, all captured and printed for the world to see. More importantly, the second half of the story spread faster. The speech from my groom's father, the declaration that I would co-own everything. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was public record. My parents' humiliation was sealed in ink. Calls flooded in before noon. Reporters wanted statements. Business partners reached out with cautious curiosity. Friends of the family sent messages filled with thinly, disguised pity. My parents remained silent, refusing to comment, but their silence screamed louder than any denial could have. The empire they once lorded over in our town was collapsing, their reputation now tied to their cruelty toward their own daughter. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt the weight of something heavier, the certainty that they would strike back. My mother never allowed herself to lose ground without clawing it back twice as hard. My father never forgave challenges to his authority. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their enemy. And enemies, in their world, were to be destroyed. That evening, as I sat in my new home with my husband, I found myself staring at the unopened envelope that had been slipped beneath our door. No name, no return address, just a folded piece of paper inside. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. 3 words stared back at me. This isn't finished. I folded the paper slowly, sliding it into a drawer. My husband saw the look on my face but didn't ask. He didn't need to. We both knew what it meant. The wedding had been the stage for their first blow. The note haunted me for days. I carried it in my mind more than in the drawer where I had hidden it. My father's handwriting was like a shadow, a reminder that silence wasn't peace but preparation. My mother's quiet was no different. She hadn't spoken to me since the wedding, yet her absence felt louder than any insult she could throw. Both of them had vanished from the spotlight they had once chased, but I knew them too well to think they would retreat forever. They were waiting, calculating, planning the blow that would strip me of the power I had been handed. Whispers reached me before they did. Old friends called, not out of loyalty, but out of fear of being caught on the wrong side of whatever was about to happen. They told me my parents had been visiting old allies, trying to convince business partners that my father-in-law's empire would crumble if I were given authority. They were spreading doubts, trying to poison minds before I could plant roots. My sister, too, was moving quietly, attending gatherings where my name was ridiculed, trying to place herself as the sensible daughter who could be trusted. It was the same script I had watched my whole life, lies wrapped as truth, whispers delivered as daggers. But what they hadn't considered was that I wasn't the same girl they had raised to endure humiliation in silence. Their world was one of appearances, reputations, leverage. I had all 3 now, and I intended to use them. The first strike came in the form of a meeting. Not mine, but theirs. My father arranged a private dinner with 2 of my husband's largest investors. He promised them that I was inexperienced, unstable, a liability that would sink the company if allowed influence. He underestimated 2 things, their loyalty to my father-in-law and my ability to anticipate his every move. The moment the dinner ended, I already knew every word he had spoken. Information flowed to me faster than he realized. By the next morning, I had scheduled my own meeting with those same men, not to defend myself, but to lay out contracts they had been waiting on for months, deals my father-in-law entrusted to me directly. They signed with confidence, sealing not only business gains but their allegiance. My father's attempt to discredit me collapsed before it could spread. My mother tried a different angle. She reached out to the press, feeding them stories about my difficult upbringing, framing herself as the long-suffering parent of a daughter who never lived up to expectations. But the public had already seen the photographs from the wedding. They remembered her laughter after my father struck me. Sympathy was not hers to claim anymore. Articles turned against her, labeling her cold, manipulative, unfit even as a mother. What she thought would be her redemption became another strike against their name. Each move they made backfired. Each attempt to undermine me only exposed their desperation. But I knew they wouldn't stop until they had nothing left to lose. That moment came quicker than I expected. One evening, a message reached my husband's desk. It wasn't from an associate or a partner. It was from my sister. She asked for a meeting, claiming she wanted to end the feud, to bridge the family divide. My husband warned against it, but I agreed. Not because I believed her, but because I knew this was the opening act of their final attempt. We met in a quiet restaurant, away from cameras and eyes. My sister arrived dressed elegantly, her smile rehearsed, her voice dripping with false warmth. She spoke of reconciliation, of rebuilding what had been broken. I let her talk, watching the way her hands fidgeted beneath the table, the way her eyes flicked toward the door every few minutes. She wasn't here alone, and she wasn't here for peace. Sure enough, minutes later, my parents walked in. My father's shoulders stiff, my mother's expression carefully arranged. They slid into the booth across from me, as if we were a family gathering for dinner rather than adversaries preparing for war. My father spoke first, his voice low, controlled. "You've humiliated us. But it doesn't have to end this way. Step down. Leave the company. Walk away with your dignity before it's stripped completely." My mother leaned forward, her voice sharper. "You've had your moment. Don't ruin yourself by clinging to something you can't handle. Let your sister take the place meant for her." I listened unmoving. The old me might have shrunk under their words, might have believed their certainty. But their power was gone, and all that remained were echoes of what they once were. I let the silence stretch, their confidence faltering as they waited for a reaction. Then I placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward them. Inside were documents, financial records, contracts, and statements, all linked to the favors they had traded and the debts they had hidden over the years. I hadn't dug them up. My father-in-law had provided them, waiting for the day I would need them. Their secrets were mine to reveal, and with them, their reputation would disintegrate permanently. My father's face darkened as he flipped through the pages. My mother's breath hitched, her mask cracking for the first time. "This," I said calmly, "is what I walk away with if you force me. Every partner you ever deceived will know. Every friend you still cling to will see the truth. You wanted me to feel powerless, but you're the ones cornered now. This ends tonight." My sister tried to speak, but my mother silenced her with a hand. My father closed the folder slowly, his jaw tight. He had no words. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final. Then, without another glance, he rose from the table. My mother followed, her expression hollow. My sister lingered, torn between defiance and defeat, but in the end, she left too, trailing behind them like a shadow refusing to disappear. The next week, their downfall unfolded in full. Partnerships dissolved, old debt surfaced, and the community they had once ruled with arrogance turned its back on them. They weren't destroyed by me alone. They were destroyed by their own pride, their own refusal to see that the world no longer bent to their will. I had simply held up the mirror. On the day the news declared their bankruptcy, I stood in the office beside my husband, signing documents that secured our position. My father-in-law watched, a rare smile breaking his stern expression. "You've done what many couldn't," he said. "You didn't just survive them. You outplayed them." I thought of the girl who had stood frozen at her wedding, cheeks stinging from a slap, laughter echoing around her. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone who had endured, who had fought, who had won.